The Talmud tells us a statement, Ein simcha ka'ataras hasveikos, which means that there is nothing more joyous to a person than when they relieve themselves of doubt. So we have a situation or a doubtful situation, which we probably have quite often in our lives. We don't know what to do. Should we do this? Should we do that? And we're confused. And somehow we get clarity. Sometimes it comes with time. Sometimes it comes with information, whatever it is. But we get that, and suddenly we feel so much better. And it says there's no joy as great as getting rid of confusion. So that's a really powerful expression, that we're very joyous when we get rid of confusion. And so the reality is that our lives are full of confusion, and it's hard for us to get clarity. Clarity is very, very valuable, and clarity is illuminating. And I would say that when we have clarity, our lives are illuminated. When we have confusion, our lives are in the dark. And that's sort of the way we feel. And that's the reason why. It's simply like when someone turns the lights on. How good that feels when you're stumbling through the dark and someone turns the lights on. That's why it's so joyous when someone gets rid of a doubt that they have. So I'm going to be talking about confusion versus clarity and the benefits of clarity. When we look through a window as an example, if you look through one of these windows as an example, right? So when you look through a clear pane of glass, what the glass offers you, if it's clear, is that it is transparent, and therefore whatever's going on behind that glass you can see very clearly, and you know exactly what's going on over there. And so you have clarity. The second you have a pane of glass which is somehow blurred, whether it's a beautiful stained glass or whatever it may be, but the second it is obscuring on some level what's going on behind it, you no longer have clarity as to what's going on behind it. Why don't you have clarity? For the very simple reason that the window is not transparent. So the second we have something that is in front of something else, we have A in front of B, and A is not transparent, it creates confusion for us. Or a lack of clarity, if you will. Suddenly we can't see exactly what's going on. And so this is the reality of our life all the time, and a direct continuation of what we were talking about last week, the body and the soul. The body always serves as a potential obstacle to what's going on inside. There's always the outside of anything and the inside. And if the outside is not transparent to what's going on inside, the outside will create confusion for us, because it's going to obscure our view, and it's not going to be transparent, and we're not going to be able to see what is really going on. And this is actually the whole story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The whole story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is that God tells them about two trees. There's the tree of life, the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. And then you have the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, Tov V'Ra, of good and evil. What was this tree? The tree of life is the tree of life. Life actually refers to truth and eternity. And therefore it's the source of life. The source of life is God. And so the tree of life was a tree which represents the presence of God. The tree of good and evil is a tree that has a blend in it, a mix. It's a mix of good, a mix of evil. Why did God tell Adam and Eve not to eat from that tree? For a very simple reason. God said that tree represents confusion, because there's a blend of good and evil. And the second you have a blend, even though it seems like when it comes to scotch, a blend is a good thing, ultimately, it's not good at all, because it creates confusion for us. We don't have clarity. And so therefore God said, you're a human being. You don't want to have confusion in your life. That is the source of all problems, when you don't have clarity. You don't know what you are dealing with. And so therefore, don't eat from that tree. In fact, Adam and Eve, before they ate from the tree, had no interest in eating from the tree. The only reason why they ended up eating from the tree, which of course they have to take responsibility for, but was the snake pushing them to eat from the tree. You don't know what you're missing. God's hiding something from you. There's a reason why He doesn't want you to eat from the tree. He doesn't want you to discover something in the whole thing. And the snake actually pushes Eve to eat from the tree. In a certain respect, the way the verse would say it, it seems like implies like physically pushes her, and she eats from the tree. What happens at that moment is Adam and Eve, when they eat from the tree, they are actually ingesting the possibility for confusion. And from that moment on, they no longer were transparent beings to truth, to God, to goodness, however you want to term that. Suddenly there was confusion, and therefore there wasn't transparency. There wasn't clarity. How do we see that? We see that very clearly. The second after they eat from the tree, what does the Torah tell us? They went into hiding. Why did they go into hiding? Because they recognized that they were naked. You mean that until they ate from the tree, they didn't recognize that they were naked? They weren't aware that they weren't wearing clothing? They were very aware that they weren't wearing clothing, but before they ate from the tree, they had no issue, which may sound strange to us, but it wasn't strange to them at all. And the reason why is because their body, which was the outside, was transparent to what was going on inside, and therefore there was no shame about their body, because their body was completely transparent to the essence of who they are, which was their soul. The second they ate from the tree and they lost integrity and they created confusion, they suddenly became aware of this entity which was no longer transparent to their truth. It became an obstacle to their truth. And so suddenly they become aware of this body, which is they are ashamed of because it's unclothed. Because now they see it as an entity in and of itself, as opposed to just being of service, transparent to the purpose of man, which is their soul. And so what we see is something very clear. They eat from the tree of confusion. They enter into a state of confusion. And from that moment on, we go down a long lane in history, which we're still on, by the way, of complete confusion in this world. Complete confusion. And arguably, what we're doing every single day of our lives is trying to create more clarity. The more clarity we have, the easier our lives are. That is for sure. The more we can understand every single thing that's going on in our lives, the simpler our lives are. And so, clarity is simply knowing what is really happening. What's going on? What is really happening right now? There are different interpretations that there can be to what's happening. But when we understand the truth of what's happening, we're transparent to what is really happening, then we can be in touch with maybe what we would call what's real or reality, and we're functioning in a healthy way, and we're not in a confused state. And that's a very powerful place to be. Let me give you an example that I think we can all relate to. When someone is speaking to us, right? We're having a conversation. There is what they're saying, and then there is what they are really saying. When we hear what they're saying, we're just hearing the body of their words. When we hear what they are really saying, we are hearing the soul of their words. Generally, in conversations, particularly because God has a sense of humor that is particular specifically to marriages, when one spouse talks to another, what we tend to hear is only the body of the words. And we react to the body of the words. Whereas when we stop for a minute, we can slow down what's happening and slow down what they're saying so we can hear what they are really trying to say, which they may not be actually saying in body, either because they don't know how to articulate it well, or because they're saying it. You just need to pay attention to what they're conveying and what they're saying. Then suddenly we hear what they're really saying. And that's really what's going on. What's going on is what they're really saying, not what they're saying. Really saying versus saying. You following me? Okay, give you a very simple example. We'll use a parent and a child. Or you can use a spouse, but I prefer to use a parent and a child in this instance. Okay? So a child is really upset for some reason, right? It could be 1,001 reasons, and the child yells at the parent, "I hate you," right? What is the child saying? Well, if the parent listens to what the child is saying, "I hate you." Get into your room. That's not the way you talk to a parent. Blah, 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 right? Or we can hear what the child is really saying. What the child most probably is really saying is, I want to be loved, and I feel that you don't love me. That's probably what the child is really saying. And so actually, on the contrary, instead of sending the child to the room, what the child really needs is a hug. But the child only gets the hug if we really hear that I hate you means I want you to love me. But if I hear I hate you, the body of the words, without hearing the soul of the words, what's really being said, then we're completely disconnected from reality. And so we respond to it in a negative way because we're not responding to what's really happening. We're responding to our image of what's happening. It's almost like a hallucination. Imagine if you see someone swinging punches in the air and you're saying, like, what are you doing? He says, what do you mean? There's a guy attacking me, and the guy's hallucinating. There's no one there attacking him, right? But in his mind, someone's attacking him, so he's swinging. We would laugh at him. And really, in many respects, that's a large part of our life because we live in the confusion of what we see versus what is really going on, and that's because what we see often stops by the body because it's not transparent to what's really happening. Following me? This is the reason why we live in a society where we worship athletes. Right? What is really amazing about athletes? There's something really amazing about athletes. If you have a basketball center, right, who can score over 30 points a game, right, and he knows how to focus, and he knows how to be in the moment, and he knows how to team play, and and all of the skills involved in being an excellent basketball player. That's an amazing thing, and there's a lot to learn from the guy. But let's just say, in theory, right, once in a while you have this situation where the guy's an outstanding basketball player, but he's a completely immoral person, right? Now, never happens, right? But theoretically, so if that were to happen, you have a person who, if we worship, if we cannot identify where the value is versus where the value isn't, we worship the entirety of this person. And that's a dangerous thing to do because there's a lot of negativity, perhaps, to the person we just described in theory, right? But when we can differentiate and know the facts of what we're dealing with, the reality of this person, so then we can say, well, there is value that we can learn, but differentiate behavior from behavior. So we always have to know when we're not in touch, when we don't make those distinctions, then we end up in responding, swinging punches at something that doesn't exist, or responding to something that really isn't there. And that's something which is never a healthy thing to do. This is true with the way we look at other people. We judge them from their body versus judging them from their soul. There's a whole industry of teaching people how to present themselves. Right? Not how to be, how to present themselves. But that's all, it's like, take a couple that's dating, okay? You take a couple that's dating, and it's interesting. So we put on a presentation when we're dating, and we specifically hide certain parts of ourselves, right? We know that after marriage, and usually it happens the day after because there's no reason to play the game anymore, right? So suddenly we are who we are, but why would we want to present to the person something different than who we are if they're going to end up having to live with who we really are? Right? So, of course, to some extent, we present ourselves nicely. It's also part of being an intelligent human being. But the idea of hiding parts of ourselves is questionable because at the end of the day, they're marrying who we are inside, not who we are on the outside. And so this is very important when we talk about transparency and we talk about clarity. Always bringing clarity to something and being able to see the world in clarity. A parent wants to be a good parent. So the parent is going to choose to devote a lot of time with their children. How do parents spend most of their time being a good parent for their children? We strive very hard to always give our children things which are going to make them happy. Right? So we give them an endless amount of things which are going to make them happy. And here's the reality. The reality is that the things that we give our children actually are not what our children want, and it's not what they want from us. I mean, they enjoy them, right? And that's not really what makes them happy. And so we have to ask ourselves, am I giving my children things, or am I giving my children what they really need from me as a parent, which is the security and the acceptance and all of the things that a parent can give a child, which otherwise they don't get. So when we're on the outside, the body of things, we're giving, giving, giving. What a good parent I am. I took them on this fantastic skiing trip, or I gave them this magnificent gift, right? As opposed to sitting down and actually listening to what's going on in their life. And these are all things that we know, but we all need reminders of. And this all goes back to the tree and seeing the difference between being confused by I'm a good parent because I'm giving all of these things to my children, which we confuse ourselves with, versus actually giving our children what it is that they really need. So I want to take this because here's where I'm really going with all this. That is seeing the world in a much deeper way than we actually see it. Because there's much more to this than only our interactions with other people. There's actually the way we see everything that we experience in the world. And that is seeing it from a much more spiritual place. You know, the way our spiritual, mystical teachings define anything which is negative is with a word called klipa. Remember that word, anyone? Klipa means a shell. And for example, if you go to Israel and you ask someone to peel an orange for you, the peel is called klipa. That's what it is. It's a shell, right? A walnut has klipa. It has a shell. Negativity is always referred to in Jewish mysticism as klipa. Why? Because it is obscuring the primary and important part of the substance in front of you. In the case of a fruit, what's significant, or you take a nut in particular, because somehow they make chocolate-covered orange peels, I believe. So we'll go to a walnut. I don't think they do that with the shell of a walnut yet, right? So you go to a walnut. What's of value, of course, is the nut, and you have to crack the nut open, the shell open in order to get to the nut. The reason why all negativity is called klipa is because what you have is an obscuring of the primary, of what is really important. And whenever we have something hidden, we have something which is negative, because it prevents us from being in touch with that which is really going on. So we can even possibly do this in this room, I don't know. But when you have make a shadow, right? When you make a shadow, so I make a shadow with my hand and you have a shadow on the floor, right? That is really the perfect paradigm for the spiritual worlds versus the physical world. Reality is created up here. And what's happening in the physical world is all a projection, a shadow of what's going on over here. And so therefore, when we are dealing with the outside, and we think that's reality, and we all know, like, it would be ridiculous to think that the way to get rid of a shadow is to move the shadow. We would all know that. It's obvious. You have to move whatever is creating the shadow. We have to know this as well with every single aspect of our life. And that is that the physical reality that we live in is actually a projection of something, of a spiritual dynamic which is always taking place. This is true, as we discussed, in our human relationships. And this is true as well in our interaction with the world at large. Anything going on in the world, we have to ask ourselves, what is the spiritual dynamic which is taking place over here? And then we understand how the physical dynamic is being created. And when we confuse the two and we get lost in the shadow and think that that's reality, we're actually in confusion. And that's a very unhealthy place to be in. And this is really important when it comes to religion, actually, because many people look at religion as a ritualistic, body of people getting together and doing rituals. And rituals actually are only the shadow of a spiritual dynamic, of something deeper that's happening. But if we only get in touch with the ritual, we feel very shallow and empty. And we say, like, what's the purpose of this? And why should I even do this? And it raises a lot of questions. But the second we get in touch with the spirit of it, what's driving it, then suddenly the rituals have tremendous meaning. We're sort of excited about it. We're driven to it because there's something much deeper we understand that's going on. So let's take, for example, keeping kosher, right? Okay, it's a nice thing. It's self-control is always a good thing. A little bit of discipline, right? So the Torah tells us don't eat these foods. Okay, very nice, right? But at the end of the day, it's a challenge, like any diet is. A challenge, right? But when we understand that we, as Jews, are made up of a unique spiritual identity, and that identity needs to be nourished with unique nourishment, so then at least we're beginning to understand that this whole thing of kosher is coming from actually a much deeper place, which is a spiritual dynamic. And that inspires us much more in understanding the value of keeping kosher. Take prayer, right? You come in, you have to say all these words, and what's the significance of it, what's the meaning of it. But imagine if we were able to change our entire paradigm of ourselves and God to one of simply a relationship. That just like I want to create a relationship with every one of you, I want to create a deeper relationship with my spouse and with my children, I want to have a real relationship with the creator of the universe. And so then I don't walk in and say, well, I have to say these prayers. I ask myself, how can I learn to really have a conversation with God? And so suddenly what's happening is something which is much deeper, because we're approaching it from the soul of it, not from the body of it. And we're looking at it more transparently. We don't see the ritual as an end in and of itself, but we're seeing through the ritual as just an avenue to what is deeper and what's lying there. The whole observance of Shabbos is really all about what we're talking about. Why do we shut down for a day? So that we can reconnect with God. It's not about us not doing these things and having to do these things. All of those things are really an outcome of me wanting to have a deeper connection with the deeper spirit of reality as opposed to the physical reality as we see it. So how does a person get to this place? How can we get ourselves closer to maybe seeing the spirit of the world as we know it? So we look at the physical world and we see every interaction going on in our lives and every element that's happening in our lives as how can we see this spirit that's driving it, the meaning behind it, as opposed to just what is happening. As opposed to just seeing incidents happening in our lives, understanding that there's a purpose and a reason for these incidents to happen. There's one way to do it. And of course, any significant transformation in our lives doesn't happen with a snap of fingers, but it happens through a slow, progressive commitment. And that is through a person connecting to the light, the illumination which God has given us. And that illumination simply is the Torah. The Torah is actually called Torah Or, the Torah which illuminates, which is light. And it's called that because without us studying Torah slowly and progressively, we don't have the ability to open ourselves up and to see what is really going on. To actually be able to make the world that we see, the physical that we see, transparent to a deeper dynamic. The only way we can do that is through going through the lens that God has given us to be able to learn slowly and train our vision to be able to see that there's a deeper dynamic that's going on. And that's the only way we can learn how to view our lives in a much deeper way. So I encourage every single one of us to find some way, and in today's world it's really easy, especially with the internet, to just take a step every single day to studying something from the Torah that will give you a deeper perspective on everything that we experience in our lives. And you will see with time, when we do anything progressively, that with time, within a month, 2 months, 5 months, you suddenly begin to see that you look at things in a completely different way. And it is life transforming because we begin to see that we start responding to what I would consider reality, what is real, which is what's really driving what we see playing out. And when we do, we lead much more fulfilling and meaningful lives. And our lives are illuminated. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your bagels.